you need to share it onto pages. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My God, it's 1 o'clock already. So, as promised, myself and Ellie from Square Peg are here. And we're going to take you through some stuff around the SEN Green Paper, SEN Review. Is it called anything else? Like, have they called it anything else?
SEN Green Paper.
Yeah, SEN Green Paper.
Yeah.
Because the deadline for responses is the 22nd of July, which is coming up on us thick and fast. And obviously, me being ADHD I've left it till now to look at it properly. I keep looking at it in bed, reading it and going, oh my God, this is so terrifying, and then putting it down again. But I'm like, right, we're going to have to do something about this now. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take you through what it is, what we're being asked for, how to respond. And then we're also going to tell you a little bit about what EOTAS Matters are doing that you can jump on board with. We really need you to get behind this. It's specifically around one piece of the review that we feel is a big gaping hole, particularly for EOTAS families. And then Ellie will also give you a little bit of top line about stuff separately that Ellie and Not Fine in School are working on for the schools bill. But specifically, we're going to talk about the SEN Green Paper today. So stick with us. Let us know if you have no idea what we're talking about. Pop it in the comments. That's what we're here for today. We're not going to tell you what to say in your consultation, but we are going to highlight for you how you can respond and the easiest and most straightforward ways to respond, and maybe just do a little bit of kind of framing it for you so that you've got an idea of why that might be important. And particularly, I'm speaking to EOTAS families on this one. So Ellie Costello is here from me from Square Peg. Do you want to do a quick top line of what Square Peg do and why you exist? Not you personally, but Square Peg.
Why are you here? So Square Peg was, well, first and foremost, I'm a parent carer to 2 kids with needs that encompass education, health, social care, and mental health. And my kids were classed as school refusers, and that journey led me to the fantastic Facebook forums that were out there around 2015, 2016, found Not Fine in School, which was my saving grace and tribe, really, where everyone whose child struggles with access to education and attendance ends up. And out of that, Square Peg evolved with Fran Morgan founding it as a social enterprise in 2018. And then we launched formally as a KIC, community interest company, not for profit. In 2020, early 2020, we met in February 2020, went into lockdown, and then had to work remotely. But we're basically here to campaign, lobby, and affect change and raise awareness on behalf of any child that struggles to access education and attend school. So we sort of cover anybody and everybody in the margins, pushed into the margins. That's us really, sort of focusing on mental health as a priority, and educational entitlement as a foundational strategy, policy aim.
Amazing. Nice and snappy. There's your elevator pitch if you were going, I don't know, to the top of the tallest building in the world.
Yeah.
Just the doors are opening. Wait, I'm not finished.
Sorry about that.
Don't be sorry, because you do a lot of good work. I think this might be Carly. If you're getting a Facebook user when I bring your comment up, just go up to the top of the video and let StreamYard see who you are, and then it will tell us your name. Like Vicky is just tagging people. So please do share this. And if you're watching on replay, give it a share. And just for like 3 seconds, give me some angry faces, and then that will boost the algorithm as well. When I watch it back and I see lots of angry faces, I'm like, oh, but I know that I've asked people to do it, so it's fine. So we're going to talk about the SEN Green Paper today. So Ellie is kind of like really at the hard edge of campaigning and lobbying on this, and she's very kindly giving us some time today to help parents get their head around what this all means. It's a pretty meaty tome. This is it. It's pretty chunky, but what we've done is we've identified a place where it can be it's Paula, Facebook user, it can be where you can go to do like a kind of a minimal time, maximum input response, and then we're also going to tell you other ways to respond. So Ellie, green paper, what is it?
So the Green Paper has been written off the back of the SEN Review, which the Education Select Committee undertook way back pre-pandemic. It was a really thorough, excellent piece of work. They wrote a report which was pretty damning and pretty accurate. And government went away, took that away, and reviewed that piece of work. And off the back of that, they finally published a Green Paper. So Green Paper is like phase 1 of legislative change. Mm-hmm. Phase 2 is a white paper. And the white paper is after the Green Paper, during which there is consultations and there is continued ongoing work. The white paper then proposes and announces the areas for change, and it starts the legislative process through both houses in Westminster, usually starting with the Lords and going down to the Commons and back to the Lords, but it can be the other way around. So we've got a journey to go on. We're about to go on a journey. The Green Paper is the start of that journey in terms of the official intention by government to start the formal proceedings to make changes that will hopefully fix the problems that everyone's raising. I think what's difficult about the Green Paper is that everybody had a lot of hope in there, and looking at it, it's very top heavy, it's very systems heavy, it's not much in the detail, and that raises a lot of questions. And the policy meetings I've been meeting with the third sector organisations who are also campaigning for all types of different families and children, that's been a continued sort of question. Where's the detail? What does it mean? You're saying you're going to do this, but how does that tie in with that? So yeah, it's a bit of a mess.
Yeah. So what are we actually being asked to do then? What are we being invited as parent carers to do at this stage?
Share your views on the questions that the government is asking. Now, that's sort of the problem with consultation, is that the government will already decide on the questions they want answered, rather than maybe asking the questions that everyone wants answered. So there's a bit of a rub in there, which is why I would recommend that it's for families who have spoons, and obviously most of us struggle with spoon levels on a day-to-day basis. However, if you can, there's a couple of options where you can answer some questions. You can either do it through the government's own consultation portal, which we can share, which is fairly meaty in itself, and not very accessible. And the government has done some more accessible materials, but again, their word is that they're not that accessible either. And they are running roadshows. There's been more than 150 roadshows and participation events, and various organisations, Contact Family, National Network of Parent Carer Forums, Disabled Children's Partnership, which we'll talk about more specifically in a minute, Special Needs Jungle. There's a whole load of activity in order to invite views, but you can also do it independently. And that's quite important, because your evidence in joining those conversations will all be gathered, and the body of it will be important. But there's also an option just to write your own story and talk about where you think the gaps are. So, all of those questions that government is asking about is all well and good, but actually this is what really matters to me as a family, and this is why. And you can email that in as well, and that will also be counted as evidence. So I think that's really important, because there are some blind spots, as we were talking about, and we can explore that.
And what we're going to do is when we finish this, I'm just putting some links in the comments, but when we finish the video, I'll put all the links in the title of the video as well, so that people can see it. So what we're going to do is, there's one particular resource that we both think is a pretty accessible way, and it's the Disabled Children's Partnership. Now they have provided 6 questions, which obviously every individual organization that does this have their own agenda, and an agenda with a small a, it's not a bad thing, but they have written a piece of their website where you can go to their website, you can answer those 6 questions. It gives you some free text, so you can kind of add your own views, and then they will submit all of that as part of the consultation. So what we are recommending is there's also Special Needs Jungle. They've got some really good stuff on there. And I have also popped a link into the actual government SEND review consultation, and I'll put the email address in. But what we're suggesting is that if you know you want to do something, but you are low on energy and you are low on capacity, actually the Disabled Children's Partnership is a good place to go to make sure that you're catching like what we think are the key issues. Yes. So what we thought we'd do is we'll just take you through those 6 questions that they've identified and just give you a little bit more background on each one. We're going to do like 2 minutes on each one. And also then I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I think as an EOTAS family, you could use that portal to get a little bit more detail in, and then we're going to talk about what EOTAS Matters are going to do specifically, because there's a piece of the SEN review and the Green Paper that as an organisation, i.e. me and anyone that will listen to me, I'm quite concerned about. So the Disabled Children's Partnership, there's 6 questions. Should we go through them one at a time, and then we can maybe I can bring them up on screen, I think. Let me just see if it will let me do it. Will it let me do it all in full? Let me see. It might be too much text. 1 second. Oh, come on, scroll down, you beggar. Press the right button. Okay. Oh. One of the proposed changes in the government's reforms is to change the way parent carers pick schools. This is question 1 on this paper. Instead of a parent specifying a school, a local council would instead give parents a tailored list of placements from which to choose. Would you be confident in being able to get the right school or college placement for your child under this arrangement? Ellie, thoughts?
So, my immediate thoughts are that this is sort of fraught with difficulties, because what it does is it limits choice. It limits what is considered suitable to another's opinion of what is suitable for your child. If you can hear coughing, my husband's got COVID. I'm really sorry. So there is, a major sort of challenge here in terms of parents have tried for a very long time. They have a child with extremely high needs for which a very limited offer would be considered suitable, and tailored to aptitudes and age and skills and all the rest of it, and development. And then if we've got local areas who are just offering 6 settings in their area for their child, and that's it, we're suddenly into territory where we're not upholding equality and disability duties, and we're not necessarily taking an individualized, personalized approach.
Yeah.
And that is what our children need and are entitled to.
So we're encouraging people, if they use this portal to submit their answers, to think about specifically, if you know your way around the Equality Act, to be thinking about, the fact that anything that's done should not discriminate against your child. Your child should have an access to suitable adjustments and provisions to meet their needs under their protected characteristics. Their protected characteristics in this case being that they're disabled.
Yeah.
And that limiting choice would actually be discriminatory in that case, or could potentially be discriminatory. And if you think about it for you, if you know, for example, that there's a particular school and maybe it's out of area, there's a chance that if this came in, that you would not have that option. So you may know there's a specialist independent outside your local authority, but it wouldn't be on your list of approved, that half a dozen list that you'd have to choose from. So that would actually be, that would limit your choice. It would limit your children's potential for accessing the most suitable provision. So that's kind of where we're at with that one, isn't it?
And what happens if settings are full? If all 6 settings that are on the list are full, what then? I mean, it's just... It's bizarre. I also am concerned based on the admissions code of practice, for example. Ordinary families have access to a wide range of settings within their local area, and you can state preference sort of 1 to 10, but you've got a huge amount of variety to choose from. So again, the devil's in the detail here, and I worry that families of disabled children are going to be disadvantaged in comparison with ordinary families under the attendance code admissions code.
And
in
the
terms
other
of choice.
thing to think about here is, for example, a lot of our families have PDA kids, And if all of those schools on that list were schools that used PBS or ABA, we know that neither of those would be in any way suitable for children who are PDA, even if they're not formally identified as PDA. So that's why we're encouraging you to particularly respond to this question, because it will
I think also as well, there's no option in there, is there, to think about what happens if a child can't access any setting. So therefore, is there going to be an EOTAS option as provision that you can then tick that box and then go down that pathway? It's not clear.
Unlikely.
So that it's just sort of feels a bit blinkered.
Yeah. So that's the first question on their list, and this is why we've picked their list, because it is a really good overview of what the options are. Question 2 on their list, there's 6. There are multiple questions within the consultation document, but these are the 6 that the Disabled Children's Partnership have picked out. Accountability in SEND. How do you think accountability in the SEND system can be improved? So when we're talking about accountability, we're talking about, the fact that local authorities can do pretty much whatever they like. And the only time we get to hold them to account is when we get to tribunal or to judicial review, or if it goes to the LGO. So thinking about, and for all of these questions, I'd be thinking about, for your personal situation, without giving them your whole life story, think about, for your circumstances, what can you give really meaty evidence around? So you could say, for example, because there was no accountability, we were out of school for 12 months with no provision, for example. So you want to think about that kind of stuff. Anything particular that you think people need to give particular emphasis to on this one, Ellie?
So before we had all of the drama in politics in the last 3 days, Will Quince had written earlier this week, or it might have been at the end of last week, to local authorities to talk about how the government was intending to tackle accountability with local authorities. And that letter talks about delivering better value, DBV. This was the government's answer to holding LAs accountable, which was, we are going to use our regional advisors, or whoever it is, I can't remember which advisor it was, but we are going to sort of parachute in our advisors who are going to work with local authorities to help them be more accountable via delivering better value. Now, what that actually means is we're going to do some legwork to look at your budgets and to try to sort of eke out the pennies here, there, and everywhere. Fine, it's useful to do that in terms of diligence, but that's not the accountability that we're talking about. We're not talking about where the pennies are going.
No.
Yeah, we're talking about what happens when statutory duty isn't upheld, and the mechanisms that are available to families. Too many are ending up forced with no other option but there. And the debate in the Lords last week around the SEND review, again, the government response was from Lady Barron was, families have the option to formally complain, go to tribunal and go to ombudsman. Well, why are we even upholding these as options? We want to be avoiding these and improving the systems. And as anyone knows, formally complaining is hideous. Most people are just destroyed by it and can't go through with it. Even if you're lucky enough to get to the LGO, are they going to look at it? Are they going to do a thorough job? Are they going to, there's just so much that's problematic. And why are we saying that this is a viable option for families? Tribunal? No, we don't want families having to go to court to access the package that their child is entitled to. So we, in terms of family voice and influencing that question, I think this is a really good one to get into, because they're not actually hearing. And I think the more voices that can talk about, it's about ensuring that the system is responsive to the duties it has. And at the moment, it's not.
I've just done mine through the Disabled Children's Partnership, and I don't mind sharing that my answer to this question was, have standard automatic trigger fines in place when local authorities miss statutory timescales. Like, fine the buggers. If they're going to fine us for not being in school, fine them for not issuing an EHCP within 20 weeks. Sure as shit, it's going to get quicker. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, like perhaps something like, I know that it probably won't go through it, but there's no way on earth they'd do that. But if enough of us say, actually, what we mean by accountability is make them do their jobs. We don't really, we're not, the money problem is a you problem, not an us problem. Don't be asking parents about budgets. We're not, that's not our job. Our job is to get what our kids need. So one of the things that I would really encourage you to do with this question is to make sure that you're clear about what we consider accountability to mean and respond in that way.
Exactly that.
Yeah. And like, you know, suggest that they find them. Okay, next question.
But also, so before we move on, I do talk to LAs and I talk to DCSs and all the rest of it, and they come back with, we don't have the funding. We don't have the funding, so therefore we can't put the staff in place. I think there's a little bit of more nuance in there where we know that there is panels and decision making that, you know, is inappropriate and doesn't actually have the child at the centre, and it is a decision that is made based on what is the money in the pot rather than what the child needs. So I think there is a bit of nuance in there. But local authorities, when the SEN Children and Families Act was enacted, you know, government did not fund post 16 to 25, and early years wasn't funded either from 0 to 5. So, you know, there were massive gaps, and we had austerity and we had services decimated. So I think anything that families can do to say, you know, my local SEN department only has 5 people in it and has 3,000 plans to run and administrate every year, you know, there's real term sort of granular detail that I think families can give in terms of how their local authority is able to cope with the job that they've got, as well as highlight the questionable duty delivery.
One of the things that I think is key with this is that in the SEN review and in the Green Paper, it says, you know, we've invested loads of money and it's made no difference. That's kind of like their position. You know, it's not about investment because we've put loads of money in, and it's not like the fact that it's not been spent in the right ways has been not addressed at all. But then also there are financial sanctions in place. You know, we've seen it where local authorities have had their budgets cut because they've not been delivering on their key performance indicators. So it's not a massive stretch to say, well, okay, then think about how you actually penalise local authorities. And I'm not without you know, like I wouldn't take a job in the local authority for all the tea in Yorkshire tea. Like I just would not. Like worst poison chalice job in the world. Like no, thank you. Not with it. Not even with someone else's 10-foot pole. And not our problem. Do you know what I mean? Like,
and also I attended in 2018. I attended a King's Fund lecture, which was one of the best things I ever went to, and it was on the past, present, and future of health and social care. And in it, the reason why it's relevant, I'm not going off on too much of a tangent, but the reason why it's relevant is because it talked about boom bust investment in the NHS, and it talked about the fact that a really convincing line that comes out of government is we've put 25 million into the NHS or 250 million into the NHS and it's a black hole and it can't continue. And what these data analysts had done is they had looked at why, when you have boom bust policy where you basically invest, cut, what happens is that you can never catch up with the holes that are there. So yes, it feels like pouring money into an empty hole, but unless you have a long-term plan and a cross-party unified co-produced strategy for children and families and for services that is sustainable, no service can create something based on the fact that they're going to be cut next year.
We've had a decade of cuts. So to now say we're going to invest, or we have invested, all we've done is gone back to where we were 10 years ago.
And not even, we haven't even caught up to where we were. So
question 3. There are other comments which I'll go back to if we have time at the end, but I want to make sure we get through all of these. Compulsory mediation. Do you agree with the government's plan to require parents and local authorities to go through mediation before a parent can appeal to the SEN tribunal? Okay, so the proposal is that you will have to go to a mediation meeting before you can lodge an appeal at the SEN tribunal. Theory being that too many tribunals are being lodged. Like, talk about trying to close the door after the horse has bolted. But, you know, because if we had the better accountability. And if councils did what they were meant to do, we wouldn't have to appeal. The problem with mediation is two things. It delays the process further, and it's not actually effective in many, many occasions. So, like, you can just say no to this. I'm not telling you what to do, but I didn't just go no. But what I would encourage you to think about here is, if they are going to bring in compulsory mediation, what do you want to tell them about what that should look like? Because the mediation process itself will need to change in order for it to be effective.
Yeah.
Ellie?
Yeah. So I'm on the fence with this one because I had 2 mediations that were really good.
Oh,
for a while, until not all of them, not everything that was agreed at mediation was implemented, and blah, 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 blah. So, but parts of mediation was really effective in that it didn't delay the process, because I was doing it at a certain point of year where the February and then the summer cut off and all the rest of it. Somehow I'd kind of done it. I still haven't worked it out. But anyway, what happened was I just happened to hit the system at a point where I got mediation really quickly. It didn't delay anything. We were in within 8 days. It was really quick. And so actually what it helped was it helped everything keep going, and it brought us together, and it brought blah. And then elements of what was agreed at mediation was implemented really quickly. And because I was so happy and focused on that, I forgot about the bits that weren't being implemented. And then I had to pick that up and register for tribunal. So I think there are various caveats about mediation being useful, and it has to be contained. It has to be within 14 days, for example, I would say, you know, so at the point that it's lodged, it's in there and it's quick, and it's not 6 or 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever. But also the limits on mediation really get my goat. So, for example, you know, what is agreed then isn't necessarily enforceable. What's the point of going to mediation if it's not enforceable? And it's not, you know, therefore, so that needs to change. But also the fact that mediation, what's agreed in mediation, then can't be used as evidence at tribunal. So, you know, if we want to make mediation effective, we've got to sort of remove those holes and tighten up the process. And again, it comes back to accountability. So, so I think mandatory mediation only if.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that there's something about consistency across local authorities. You know, some local authorities are pretty good at mediation, others are bordering on corrupt. You know, so I think that my position with this is, on paper, what you're saying makes sense, but actually in reality and in practice, my experience is. So
yes, and that's the detail that needs to be shared.
Yeah. So that's how I'd ask you to approach that one. Okay. Question 4. Making mainstream education inclusive. This is a biggie. What do you think needs to be done to make mainstream nursery schools and colleges better able to meet the needs of children and young people with SEND? So this is a massive question. And this is one of the questions that I would encourage you to really think about as an EOTAS family, what you want people to hear, because we're not given the opportunity to do that in this consultation because we just don't exist in this document. So thinking about the barriers to attendance that your child or young person has had, thinking about the exclusions, like, and I don't mean actual exclusion with the capital E necessarily, I just mean the occasions when your child wasn't able to access because it wasn't an inclusive or accessible provision for them. So there's this school of thought, I'm sure I will touch on this, that, you know, really all kids should be in a mainstream setting, and you know, we shouldn't have division and we shouldn't have segregation, and you know, and we should be like in this great big homogenized pot, and you know, and I have personal opinions about that too, but that is what they're leaning towards. You know, how do we make it so that any child can be in a mainstream setting? So do you want to dig in that a little bit, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it, because this is a biggie, and this is the one that I think people really need to use a bit of brain around.
So what I see in policy discussions is that it feels like government and wider conversations have finally caught up with the idea of inclusion, What they've done though is a little bit, it gets a bit astroturfed, and that's where the problems lie, because what happens is there's a sort of growing awareness that to be inclusive is cheaper, right? To have everyone in the same setting and everyone thriving, and it just sort of works and it doesn't create problems. That's one thing. But also you might hear in answers within, for example, Prime Minister's questions, or whenever it's sort of raised in the House, there's a line that is used on the right to a mainstream education, and they sort of pick up on what's in the United Nations sort of, rights of the child, which doesn't actually talk about the right to a mainstream education. It just talks about the right to education. Every child has the right to education. Yeah. Doesn't talk about mainstream. So there's this kind of slight sort of weaponizing of agenda that becomes quite problematic, where well-meaning ministers or policy writers or whatever have picked up elements of what inclusion could be, might be, should be, and then sort of homogenizes it into this one-size-fits-all package idea, which is sort of doesn't play out very well. For me, the idea that one size fits all is relevant and appropriate, I find really problematic. And actually, I think true inclusion for me is about embracing all diversity, all variety. It's about, having an effective needs assessment for your area. What do the families need in your area? Where is your biggest areas of needs, and responding to that, and actually not being afraid about having nuance within the local offer. That's just standard. However, I do understand that there are families who really feel it is important that their child with their needs is included, and that the system flexes around them, and that is important.
Yeah.
For my children, what happened was, though, where you have significant mental, social, emotional, mental health needs, where the environment is inaccessible, the demands are inaccessible, and their mental health is so fragile that they just actually can't access it. That is where inclusion becomes weaponized for me. That is where it was about a never-ending revolving door back into learning in the classroom. Yeah. And that wasn't in their best interest. So I think it's a massive area. The debates that happen are ongoing. They haven't changed for 35 or 40 years. There's some hot topics around whether or not you agree with inclusion as a principle, but I worry about how that's delivered, and whether or not it does actually become a value for money cost-saving exercise in my child's name rather than in my child's interests. And that's two very different things.
And that's the thing, isn't it? That's that balance, or even that difference between inclusion and isolation within an inclusive environment. So there's no point, and we've had this, I know a lot of families have experienced this, and this is maybe something you might want to include in your answer. If you've had a child that has been in a mainstream setting, but they've spent all of their time in a corridor on a desk on their own, that's not inclusion. No. On paper they're attending, but in reality they're not included. So I think be creative and be as ambitious as you want with your answer to this question, because really the answer is, the way to make mainstream education inclusive is to make it disabled affirming, neurodivergence affirming, disability friendly first, and then everyone in the setting benefits. So it's not about kind of trying to crowbar in adjustments for kids who have different needs. It's about genuinely overhauling what that provision looks like.
Exactly, and this is where it ties into education reform. So if we're thinking about, what the school's white paper could have been in terms of transforming education, there's no focus on inclusive practice in the schools bill at all. There's no sort of aims to transform. It's also and actually the schools bill should be dovetailing more with SEND and inclusion and mental health than it is, but it doesn't appear because it's a different agenda with a big A. So I think, and we talked, didn't we, earlier about I don't want my child to be a guinea pig that is there beating the pathway, for future children to sort of, you know, enjoy an inclusive environment. The environment should be changing in order to include my child, and my child, it's not on their shoulders to challenge the system. And I feel like so many SEND families are tasked with trying to change the system, whereas actually the system should be changing for the families.
Yeah. And I guess it's that thing, isn't it? You know, don't practice your theories on our kids.
Yeah.
You know, like we're not here for that. And I think there's something about, you know, real reform is going to come from having those much bigger and much harder conversations with families that are experiencing this in the here and now. And this is our opportunity to have those conversations. So don't hold back on this question, would be my advice to you. You know, go all out and make sure that you know, and I would encourage you to use the term education otherwise than at school in your answer to this question, just so that we can get it onto as many consultation papers as we can.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, next one. You're doing brilliantly, by the way. Is your brain all right?
Yeah, just.
Okay. Question 5. A national system of banding and tariffs. Do you think it is possible for a national system of banding to meet specific circumstances of different children and young people? It's a really leading question, this. I think the person who wrote this bit of is, you know, I mean, I think they know what they wanted to say. But one of the things that, just to dig into this, for people who haven't read this bit of the Green Paper. So the government has suggested that it is a move to decide levels of educational funding based on tariffs and bans. So basically, children will be grouped together by their support needs at a national level, based on conditions, for example, which would be a move away from deciding how much disabled children people get based on their individual needs as individual children, which is so dodgy, because how many of our kids don't actually have diagnoses, and how many of our kids we're still trying to have the needs identified. I mean, like, as an example, yesterday Theo got identified ADHD autistic. Yesterday. He's not been in school for nearly 4 years. So, and he's been autistic ADHD since the day he was born. So, and he's 17. So, you know, if we were looking at banding for a child like him, and there are thousands of children in a similar situation, particularly with social, emotional, mental health. If we're looking at a banding based on purely on diagnosis or conditions, we're going to have a lot more kids who are not going to be able to access provision based on the fact they don't meet a threshold. And we're already seeing this at local level. But how would you recommend that people best respond to this question to give it the best impact, the most impact?
I think individual experience is really important in this one, because it will help evidence why banding is dodgy and why it is anti-equality act. And I think if anybody's able, you know, there's sort of there's like really simple versions of the Equality Act to look at protected characteristics and look at duty to sort of try to draw on, but essentially banding. So I in the strategic work I do, I feel quite sorry for LAs, because I don't let it get to me too much, but
you don't lose any sleep or anything here.
But I understand, because on the one hand, there are independent settings or independent provision that is the business end of very expensive meeting of needs, and arguably some of these settings are profiteering. So therefore, banding and tariffs is useful in terms of fairness in the payment of the provision, compared to another setting that may not be charging the same, but is in fact meeting the same needs. So it's an attempt to homogenize the marketplace on what is paid for, a bit like they do with the NHS. And it's, you know, it sort of works here and there, but sometimes it doesn't, and NHS has choose and book. So I often go to the medical model and I kind of think, well, there is a sort of choose and book option where, for example, in my local area, knee operations are done by the local Nuffield if it's over capacity. So they're using an independent setting with those bandings and those tariffs in order to operate on the knee. So, you know, anyway.
I thought you... So my auditory processing, you just said the local Nuffield, and I thought you said the local mafia. The operation is done by the local mafia. And I thought, that sounds efficient.
No, don't do this. I'm ready to go today, so
No,
just
sorry,
don't
I'm
do
sorry.
it, because I'm going to corpse for about half an hour otherwise.
Oh.
Yeah, no, not mafia. But no guns are involved in this discussion. Yeah. So I can kind of see that. I can see the why. I think and I can see the reasoning. However, it's not going to be upholding equality and duty entitlements. It's not going to be in the individual personalised needs of any family. I think it's fraught with problems. And also, we know that we've got mainstream schools who said that they can't, that the banding that they're given doesn't actually meet what's in the plan. So, we've got minimal funding for mainstream schools for a child which is with an EHCP with very high needs. So for me, this is absolutely fraught with problems. It seems to be a real sort of systems solution, and families are having to evidence why it doesn't work. Whereas actually the Education Select Committee original report talked about this, and all those questions were answered 3 years ago, 4 years ago, whenever it was. So if anybody has spoons to go back to the original report, or even just link it, a lot of this was covered in the Select Committee's work. So you can just direct the government back to that.
Where do I need to? Where will that be? So that will be Education Select Committee.
Send review.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And it's that report.
2019.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Find it. Let me link it. Then people know where it is. Send an Education Disabilities first report of session 2019.
I've just seen people saying I did say mafia. Did I say mafia?
No, you didn't say mafia. You didn't. Don't worry. It's just, I think a lot of us have auditory processing, so we hear local and then we just think mafia. You didn't say mafia. You definitely said mafia.
I might have done. Anything's possible.
Yeah. Okay. So this is I'm putting it in the chat.
But I do think families' local individual experience is key here. So, if you've got an EHCP and mainstream has said can't meet me because the funding is insufficient because we're on band D and you should be on band F or whatever it is, evidence that, share that.
If you've had those conversations when they've said you don't meet the threshold because of XYZ, that's a really good example of this on a localized scale that isn't working currently, which if it was rolled out nationally would not work nationally either. So think about evidencing that. Okay. Question 6. Doing great. This is a very open question. What else needs to change? Do you have any other comments on the proposals in the SEN Green Paper? What are the key things you think needs to change to improve support for disabled children and their families? Over to you, parents.
Yeah, I mean, where do we start? It's just, this is just makes my head go bonkers.
I mean, I'm glad this question is in there because it does mean use that Disabled Children's Partnership portal to make sure that you get your own position across. Okay, so it is a place for you to give any other thoughts you have. So you can comment on specific parts of the Green Paper. You can use the box to talk about what other important things need to change to disabled children's services generally. You could add whatever you want to add about your particular circumstances. I would just really encourage you to think about, in every situation, and I know it's boring, but I know I bang on about it all the time, we're evidencing that we know what we're talking about and we're putting data and evidence in front of them. So we're being as specific as we can be around what our additional comments are. So what specifically do you want to highlight? Is it around the Equality Act? Is it around the delays in getting provision? Is it around, we're going to talk about alternative provision in just a second, but is it around, attendance and suitability and, full-time provision and that not being clear? So think about your own situation and if you're answering these 5 questions, what do you feel is missing? What are the top line? And maybe think about 3 things that are your top things that you want to include. Detail it really briefly, give a bit of evidence, and be really clear about what you want to make sure is heard.
Exactly that
will be read by somebody. God knows whose job that's going to be, but God love them. But I would absolutely recommend that you do that. When you do it, go on.
I was wondering if you could ask your child what needs to change for this question as well. So we're getting children's voice in there, because often they will absolutely have a single thing that would have made the difference. And I would just like to get some child voice in there. It's somewhere. I know that there are organisations, I think Kids do something, and then National Children's Bureau, but anyway, in terms of ordinary grassroots family voice, this is as good a place as any. And using the language of policy, so going back to individualised, personalised, thinking about my child as an individual that isn't necessarily diagnostically led, it's needs led. It's just reminding them. Everybody keeps on reminding them, and the SEND review 2019 paper did actually sum it all up brilliantly. If you've got any ideas, this is the place to put it as well. Just
put it in the comments and let other people use your thoughts and feelings as well. Like, share it, like, by all means, say I'm going to put this, and like use other people's stuff. One thing I would recommend is that you make sure that in here that if it's something that feels appropriate to you, that you put something in there about it's gone, it'll come back in just a second. Social, emotional, mental health.
Oh yeah, there's not enough focus on mental health and what constitutes AP, but we can come on to that as well.
Yeah, the AP thing is oh God, it was right on the tip of my tongue just then, and I don't know. I read a comment and then it went. I'll come back to it. But something about making sure that you're stressing that, oh, this is it, it's come back now. That the way of measuring success. So are we really committed to measuring success based on GCSE results, or are we measuring success based on whether children are able to progress into adulthood without then becoming a child who has to access adult services because their mental health is so significantly impacted by their educational career? So that, I think, is a good place to put that. That stuff around, you're all very focused on outcomes, and your outcomes are literally just GCSE results, where we've got kids who, we just want them to make it to 18,
exactly. And I think in the one of the first conversations I had at policy level was because we had the green paper and the school's white paper come out one day after the other. And, the first thing that leapt out to me was that we had a parent pledge in the white paper that talks about all children meeting, 90% of children meeting a certain standard. And it was just like, well, which parents are you talking to? Because the ones that I know don't give a monkeys really about any of the standards that you're following. And why are we looking at these KPIs? Because they're not in the best interest of our children. In terms of what we're measuring, in terms of, are they mentally healthy when they're 40? Are they living in secure, stable housing? Are they able to sustain relationships? Are they able to exactly find employment and pay their bills? And, what are those KPIs? Are they well? Are they happy? Are they exercising? Are they able to go out on their own, and meet friends in the park and have a nice time? Because there's just so many long-term outcomes that we know happen in adulthood that start, the seeds are sown in childhood. I would encourage anyone to talk about that.
Sharon's going to put in her section there about not rewarding kids for full attendance and the focus on attendance. I think that's really key. And that is something that in the schools bill, when we talk about the schools bill next week, we're going to dig down into a bit more. So one of the things I was going to say was we're going to put don't leave us, because the next bit is a good bit, that we're going to put a link in for the for this particular Disabled Children's Partnership questionnaire that you can use. And as a minimum, if you have the capacity, I would go and use what we've just spoken to you about to do those 6 questions. But one of the things that isn't addressed there and is very much brushed over more generally in the green paper is the stuff around alternative provision, and then the knock-on that will have for children and families who have barriers to attendance and who might need EOTAS, eventually as a formal arrangement through their EHCP, or even as a temporary arrangement. So it's chapter 4 of the SEND review. It looks like this. You can download it on the internet. I will put it in our group. If you're not already in our group, get over there. But chapter 4 is specifically about alternative provision. So what Ellie and I have spoken about, and she's like going, yeah, do that, is that I'm going to write a response to this chapter, specifically in relation to the families that we work with and support, because this chapter, top line stuff, they're talking about, God, so much. They're talking about reducing the amount of standardizing across the board alternative provision. The basic premise is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ellie, is that their view of alternative provision is secure PRU units, and they don't think that they're effective. They're expensive, and they're basically just silo children who cannot be supported in the mainstream setting, and they don't get the outcomes. So there's data around, children who access alternative provision have worse outcomes than children in mainstream. But we've had that conversation about causation and correlation not being the same thing. And, there's a question of whether those children would have done any better in a mainstream or not. There's no data to support that will be true. And I said to Ellie earlier on, my son was in a PRU and it saved his life and it saved his GCSEs. So, and he was there for more than 8 weeks. So the idea is that what they're proposing is a formalized across the board approach to alternative provision, and that they make it very much a temporary measure, and that it's that revolving door. Like the other stuff that's the top line stuff around alternative provision, Ellie, that you think are things that parents need to be aware of at this point before we
So there, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, there was an alternative provision DFE paper that came out that was basically all about reducing the need for AP and not having children in AP. And I realised through this that government were focusing on the type of sort of secure units where and you saw the press earlier this year, children as young as 5 excluded and ending up in a PRU, and it was this real sort of whitewashing, demonising of what alternative provision was, but it was also a real homogenised view of alternative provision. As we know, AP can mean many things to many people, and it is a huge variety of provision. And not all of it is full-time and not all of it is formal. So I think there is so much experience that should be shared by your families and by any family whose child has struggled to access a mainstream environment, because I worry there's this sort of demonizing of what alternative provision can be and should be, but also there is this sort of homogenized offer that's coming out. And I keep on asking, there's a huge program around alternative provision hubs. So I can sort of see the fingers of the behaviour team in here. But so there's a sort of an understanding or an intention that alternative provision hubs, the children will be removed from the classroom, put into an alternative provision hub, sort of, reconditioned, and then put back into the mainstream classroom once they've sort of, had a bit of access to something, but it's not really clear what and how that's going to play out. And a question I keep on asking at policy level is, where does AP end and where do behaviour hubs begin? What is this all about, and who's actually driving it? So I think there is a concern around the intentions for the sector that is alternative provision in terms of those working in the sector and what it means. And then for families, we know that how we think about alternative provision is a huge variety. It could be, farm provision, or, forest school, or it could be arts-based provision, or it could be, it's there's so much out there in terms of how we think about what is alternative and how our children access it. And one of the things I keep on talking about is we cannot and we should not, because for my kids, an AP offer was the only thing that they were able to access when they were at their most vulnerable. It was the only thing and they had to fight so hard to get out the door to even try to get there for 15 minutes. It was this tiny life raft in a sort of tsunami storm, and it was the only thing that they could access. And it worked temporarily because it didn't look like a mainstream school, it didn't look like a classroom, it didn't look like formal learning. It was literally an SEMH kind of something, and that was it. And to have that sort of, to be living under the sword of Damocles on that provision being conditional and time limited, and you know, and if you jump over that fence, then we're going to be talking about reintegration, which is what we went through. It just sent us further and further and further back, because the kids know, if the focus is back into mainstream, and this is where that weaponized inclusion agenda really plays out around AP and informal offers.
Yeah.
And I worry.
I worry about this particularly for EOTAS families, because many of us, whilst our children are out of school, we end up self-funding a lot of the time, but we access alternative provision that is unregistered because it's the right fit for our children. So we have, for example, mentoring, or we have equine provision, or we have, like whatever it might be, like, games-based learning, whatever, or just even games-based provision. And none of those alternative provisions are registered, because they're tiny little independent organizations that are CICs, or maybe even just standalone sole traders. And they would not be able to register as a provision, as a school. That wouldn't be a thing that they could do. But what really concerns me, bigger picture stuff, is that for almost, not exclusively, but a lot of the families that I see that get to tribunal and get a successful alternative EOTAS package, a bespoke package, detailed in their EHCP and funded and, specified and quantified, many of those families have an alternative provision arrangement in place. And when they get to tribunal, they can make a case for that continuing, and then they can get it funded. And that is the route back to whatever their kids need to go back to, whether that's wellness, whether that's education, whether that's confidence, whatever it might be. And if we make that inaccessible for children, there will be nothing. And all of those hundreds of thousands of kids, and it is hundreds of thousands of kids who cannot be in a setting, will have no alternative, and we will lose them. And so there's 26 points in the alternative provision chapter, but the last one says, the use of unregistered provision requires very careful planning and oversight, but current practice is often too poor. Don't disagree. The provision is often used in the absence of sufficient local planning to ensure there are high quality alternative provision school places, and poor oversight puts the educational attainment and safety of the children and young people at risk. Do disagree. We are concerned that commissioners are using a combination of part-time placements to create a full-time education package for children and young people. That is what EOTAS looks like for many of our families. That's a word.
Exactly.
This is not joined up, and no single local body is currently responsible for ensuring that children and young people are attending full-time education across the week. To find the right solution, we will issue a call for evidence in the use of unregistered alternative provision before the summer. We know that that's happening now. And this will seek views on how unregistered provision should operate, including whether the use of unregistered settings should be limited to part-time provision only as a re-engagement tool that complements education in registered schools. Ouch. And this is that's probably the most frightening piece of the whole document for me when I think about our families.
Me too.
So we don't want to scare people, but we do want to empower you to engage in this consultation process. So if you feel you can, go and look at chapter 4 of the SEN review. As a minimum, go and do the Disabled Children's Partnership questions and use either question 4 or question 6 to feed back your thoughts on alternative provision. What we're going to do, the royal we, me, over the weekend, I'm going to write a response on behalf of the EOTAS Matters to the alternative provision chapter. It will not be perfect at all, but done is better than perfect. I'm just going to do my best, or I'm going to do it even if it's not my best. And then I'm going to ask our families to share the shit out of it and get families to add their names to it. I think that's probably the best way for me to do it, just specifically. And then you can lift bits out of that to put elsewhere if you want to. It will be a document that you can use any or all of. But I want to do that on behalf of the EOTAS Matters, because the EOTAS families are not represented in this paper at all. And children who I think are some of our most vulnerable people in our society, and certainly our education system, are invisible in this provision. So that's kind of the thing. And we're going to talk a lot more about alternative provision in the coming days and weeks, because this also feeds into the schools bill. So what you're going to see over the next week, week is something from EOTAS Matters. That's a document that I would invite you to add your name to. I'm going to try and get some data together. So there'll be like a very simple questionnaire that will ask you about your experience of alternative provision, you know, how it worked, how hard it was to get, whether you were refused it, what were the grounds for that being refused. Are you accessing part-time, full-time? Has that become a formal EOTAS package? Have you been told you can't access unregistered alternative provision? All of that. I'm going to get all of that, okay, together, hopefully over the weekend, and fire that out early next week so you can feed back into that. And I'll find a way of capturing as many of those stories as I can. Meantime, Beth at Not Fine in School and Ellie are working on something around the schools bill, which is also something to feed into. So do you want to just give us a bit of an oversight on what's coming in that way?
Yeah, very, very top line. So we've been lobbying, campaigning for the last 3 weeks, I think 4 weeks, around the schools bill specifically. It is jettisoning through Parliament. It is, so we talked about the SEN Green Paper. This is the next stage on. This is the white paper, and it's already happening. But we have had to distill our asks into 3 very simple asks. So we have 3 asks that we're going to be launching at the end of today. I can share the links, and a simple sort of launchpad cut and paste that you can use to email your MPs and raise your concerns around the schools bill and what it means for vulnerable families and families in the margins who are disadvantaged and struggling, and more of us are ending up there. So and there is a sort of threat in terms of the schools bill and what it means for all families. So that's what we're focused on. There are other organisations that are doing other parts of the schools bill as well within the home education community, and also around data and data collection, and we're sort of dovetailing with that. But in terms of vulnerable families who struggle to access education, there's 3 asks that we are going to be putting out at the end of today. Please lend your support, get it out there, because what is in the schools bill directly correlates to the Green Paper, and we need all of us, parent power, coming together and really raising voices. Because for me, AP and EOTAS and SEMH children aren't visible. They're absolutely not. The voices aren't there, and there's this really sort of homogenous sort of whitewashing. It's like this oversight, and it's just easy enough to call us ghost kids and sort of, you know, a risk and a menace to society, or however we're perceived. So so I think we need to sort of come together and bang a few drums, really.
Are you able to detail for us what those 3 asks are? Or are you
yes, thank you. So the 3 asks are that we've sort of had to land on. We are calling to scrap truancy laws. We don't feel that they serve anybody. There's no evidence to show that they actually change anything. They don't actually, in terms of, they don't de-incentivize anyone from, you know, however their child is not accessing education. They're a ridiculous Dickensian thing. Let's get rid of them, number 1. Number 2, we're calling for a clause. We're calling it the square peg clause, to be added to the bill, which is calling for an attendance code of practice, and that is going to be like the SEND code of practice, but it's the attendance code of practice, and it's basically going to be hopefully ensure that there are protections in there for families who struggle with attendance. So it's going to ensure that there is, you know, all sorts of measures in place, that everything needs to be followed. This is the sort of backstop protection, I suppose. It's the alternative offer. If we can't scrap truancy laws, then what can we do to protect families from being fast tracked? Because everything that's in the schools bill will be a fast track to fine and prosecution. For example, a little nugget is if you are a child who is on a fixed period exclusion and you're seen in public with your mum, it's an instant fine. If you have 5 days or 10 lates, it's an instant fine. These are all musts. These aren't shoulds, or, you know, these are automatic. So there's huge risk for any family in there.
Stomach bug, you're stuffed, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, there was a family who did a brilliant thread on Twitter, and she said, I've got 2 children with complex needs in 2 different specialist settings, and my local area is having the roads redone, and there's 5 sets of roadworks, and I've just been late for 5 days in a row, and these roadworks are going on for 3 months, and there's nothing I can do about it, no matter what time I leave, other than 5 o'clock in the morning, in which case we'll turn up and the school's not open. That I can't do it. So scrap truancy laws, let's just get rid of that. We can do better. We should be doing better by our families. An attendance code of practice will be a best practice gold standard protection for families, and will ensure that schools and local authorities don't actually butcher the system and harm those who aren't able to attend. And then the final one is calling for a mental health attendance code, registration code, so that if your child is struggling with mental health, that the absence is authorised, and therefore families won't end up on the fast track. In terms of speaking to those in policy, the reason why this is important is A, it's a protection for families, B, it's a flag. If you've got a child with emerging mental health needs and family is reporting it, see that on your system and lean in compassionately by following the attendance code of practice with what you should do. And also it starts capturing the data. We don't actually know how many families and children are struggling with attendance due to mental ill health, because it's all lumped in with chickenpox and stomach bugs and COVID. So let's separate it out and let's actually start capturing the data. So those are the 3 asks that we've come down to. We did actually have about 10 asks, but
all of those are super pertinent to EOTAS families, though. All of those are really key for us. So thank you for doing that work. So when you've got that, we will push it out, so to speak, and we will make sure that all our families do what they need to do. There's a question about what do you do if your MP has resigned? Just check, because many MPs have resigned from their cabinet positions, but they, to my knowledge, no
they
MPs
still hold the seat.
Resigned as an MP. So they will still be an MP, they just don't have a cabinet position, as I understand.
Yeah, I think one MP I saw, she had actually resigned as an MP. So she had actually, so what will happen at local level is there will be a by-election.
Yeah. If your MP is, a chocolate teapot, or I don't know, whatever, you can, if you want to, email the education secretary as well, if you wish. Who's
that now?
Oh, Christ knows.
Someone cleverly, I think. Yeah.
Someone very clever.
Yeah. Whose
If
children
you
went to
want
public
to
school.
feedback personally on the SEN review, there is now an email address that was shared by Will Quince last week. To my knowledge, it's still connected to somebody in the education department. It's sendreview@education.gov.uk. So if you don't want to use any of these routes, or if you want to do this as well, you can use that email rather than having to go through the portal, because the portal on the government website is quite clunky. So you have to do all the questions, and there's like 18 or something. But if
and actually every single individual family response. So where if I go back to the attendance consultation in February, we had almost 2,000 families submit to our survey, but we were counted as one response. So every single response that goes through to that email will be individual, and similarly via the portal. However, that portal really isn't that accessible. And I think what you're doing, it's all really important stuff.
I'm going to speak to Jodie about how we can do it so that whatever we put in from EOTAS Matters, maybe we'll submit a load of case studies as well. They should count separately.
That's
we'll
what we
come
did.
up with something over the weekend. But I suppose do what you can, like those of us who can will. If you can't, then you don't, and you mustn't, like prioritize your own health and your well-being first and foremost. What will come, and what happens will happen, and we'll deal with it when it happens. But if you are able to engage in in this process, then I would really encourage you to do so. And I would encourage you to have friends and family do the same as well. You know, like by all means, say to them, would you go on and answer these 6 questions? If I give you a bit of a, you know, if I tell you a little bit about our situation, would you be willing to feed back on it? Because it doesn't just have to be parents and carers of SEN children who do this. So, you know, the more people we can have doing this, the better.
I had a really lovely one, which was a child had done a voice recording and they'd emailed it. So, you know, I think there are many ways to contribute, and I hope that that will be accepted as a submission. But, you know, a drawing from your child.
Get them on a video.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I think it's one of the things that was interesting when Will Quince, and I think, is he back in now?
He's back in, yeah.
Right, okay, because he went and then came back, I think. But which I am pleased about. You know, like, no politician is perfect, but I think he does get it. And his wife's a Senko, so he has a bit of a, you know, he has. So one of the things that he said on the webinar with Special Needs Jungle last week was, oh, we're really pleased. There's been hundreds of responses. And I was like, shit, that's not very many. Yeah. So, you know, I really would like to feel like if we can flood that, like, personal vested interest and agenda with a capital A, if all of the responses in the next week include the words EOTAS, I will be very happy with that.
Yeah, and AP. They
cannot ignore that. Yeah, alternative provision. You know, they can't ignore that if for the next week we hammer them with responses that include those phrases. Yeah. So, and there are, you know, 15,000 families in not finding school and 5,000 in EOTAS Matters. 20,000 families, if a quarter did it, we'd flood that inbox.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we need to sort of be visible and stop being labelled as ghost children, children not in school, and add some nuance and context to government thinking. And I'm trying on my own, but we need everybody.
Job. You know, I think the other thing as well to be aware of is that there is still this. I think policymakers, this is a sweeping generalization, but policymakers, MPs, think that parents of disabled children are not key voters, and we need to show them that we are. We need to show them that we're intellectual, that we're educated, that we're engaged, and that we will make a difference to whether they win a seat or not. So that's as important as anything else.
Oh, and finally, the other thing I've been told is give a solution. So if there is a setting, a framework, a provider in your local area that worked for your child, include it. Say, you know, this is what worked, so that there is a massive sort of local offer being gathered, you know, and it could be, you know, this worked for me or whatever. You know, this school is doing it really well in my area, but it's oversubscribed and my child can't get in. We need more like this. Start supplying what works.
Yeah, my child went from this to this, and this was how.
Yeah, exactly that. Give a solution.
Got those. Amazing. Colette, just a quick answer to your question. No, alternative provision does not include specialist schools. Alternative provision is provision that is otherwise than a school setting. So it might be forest schools, it might be a pupil referral unit, it might be medical needs tuition, it might be individual bespoke settings, it might be online tutoring, it might be the likes of MindJam or Gecko or lots of other providers like that who don't come to mind straight away. Other providers are available. You know, animal therapy, play therapy, all of those things that happen that aren't regular school offers.
Although anyone who's got a child in specialist, please do contribute to the SEND review and all of these questions and all the rest of it. It's all really, really important. Anyone with a view, please share.
And if you haven't got a view, ask in the comments what your view should be. We'll tell you and you can copy and paste that in. Not really. I'm not telling you what to write. I'm not allowed to do that. Okay, right. Thank you, Ellie. Thanks for your time today. I know you're a super, super busy woman. I hope that is COVID-free very soon. I'm going to go and drink a cold drink and maybe have a shower. I don't remember the last time I washed myself, so maybe I should do that. Right, I'll end the broadcast and just stay on so we can say goodbye. But thanks, everyone, and we'll see you all soon.